I'm getting very 2016 vibes, the Hillary Clinton campaign kind of, with her, it was stronger together. With Kamala Harris, it's freedom, kind of
Right,
buzzwords and poll
right,
tested and consultant mangled language. In fairness to Harris, she's only been running for a short time, but I haven't really seen any specific policies proposed. Hillary Clinton infamously didn't really run on an economic message or
right.
much of a policy. But you had tweeted, it's likely to work, but it's honestly gross, in reference, former San Francisco San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, I guess, was giving advice to Kamala Harris: avoid taking positions. It's working. And this is from
Right.
a Politico story. The former mayor is no longer directly in touch with Harris, but is eager to offer suggestions. He said Biden should step down now so the country could see her as president. So obviously, this was before he stepped down, but right
I
after
think what he's
he
saying is that Biden should actually step down as president,
resigned.
and that
Yeah, yeah,
yes, resign,
right.
which I really don't agree with. But anyway, but I think the important part of that is saying that she should embrace her hazy ideological categorization, because if she keeps people continually guessing, then she can adjust the interpretation of your guess every time she sees you. He's saying that she should be all things to all people.
Right.
And that's not really tenable in a presidential campaign. At some point, people are going to want to know who they're voting for, number one. And this is a very unique. We haven't had a moment like this in history in probably 100 years, if not more, where you have a presidential candidate that is largely a mystery. Didn't go through a primary. Uh, you know, didn't really take positions as vice president because she just sort of accepted the president's agenda. When she was a senator, it was entirely during the time of Donald Trump, and the Democrats were in the minority that entire time. And so she didn't really have an opportunity to pass legislation. And she was really a very cautious figure, going back to when she was a California Attorney General, not wanting to step out on a particular policy. The only time she took a lot of positions was when she ran for president in 2020, and pretty much all of those positions she reversed either during the campaign or in the last 2 weeks, as she's been a presidential candidate. So she is sort of, I think there's a tendency to project our interests, to project our fantasies onto Kamala Harris, or our ideas for how she would govern. And I think we're seeing that from both sides. I think we're seeing that from some few progressives, but I think we're really seeing that from corporate America. They're like, well, yeah, sure, she's going to be on our side, and let's see what she'll do for us.
Right. And the wanting to be all things to all people were reflected. She signed on to Bernie's Medicare for All as a senator, right before she was going to launch her presidential campaign. Then I had a town hall that with CNN that was kind of like a pillow party, in my view, very
Right.
softball. Said she was for Medicare for all. Then there was the wrath of donors and others, and kind of reversed herself after 48 hours, and then came up with a Medicare for all-ish plan
But not
that
for
was
all.
just a
Yeah.
bureaucratic nightmare of an explanation. It wouldn't be fully implemented for 10 years. So it seems that she tried to be all things to all people, and it really, really tanked. Sure, there was a lot of candidates running, different dynamic in 2020, but do you see an evolution at all from 2020 Harris to right now?
I mean, I think at this point she is basically siding with the agenda of the Biden administration, at least on domestic policy. I mean, I don't know really what's going on foreign policy on her side. There was a report in the Wall Street Journal that she wouldn't bring back the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, or the National Security Advisor. And she certainly rhetorically, I don't know if substantively, but certainly rhetorically, has talked about Gaza in different ways than the president has, with a little more sympathy for the people of Gaza. I don't know what that's translated to specifically, and she's going to be kind of in a position that like Hubert Humphrey was in 1968, where she's not the president. She can't dictate the policy. But there are a lot of people that want her to break with the president's policy when she's the sitting vice president. That was the problem with Humphrey. People wanted him to come out against the bombing in Vietnam when he had no ability to do that because Lyndon Johnson was the president. He didn't actually say he would come out against the bombing until the last week of the campaign. And the legend is if he came out a week before, he might have beat Nixon. But he didn't because he was constrained. And I think Kamala's in the same boat as far as Gaza is concerned with that.
Well, call me a cynical Susie, but as with Biden, some of donors of the Democratic Zionist happen to be Jewish. I'm Jewish. I don't think it's anti-Semitic to point that out. Jeffrey Katzenberg is co-chair of the campaign, instrumental in all the money that's been raised. He is $900 billion. Haim Saban, net worth of $3 billion. He is, I mean, from Bill to Hillary to Nancy to Schumer, one of the biggest party donors over the last 30 years. He infamously, I think The Intercept wrote years ago, he chided, kind of establishment Democrats for even rhetorically, being sympathetic after Israel was bombing Gaza. That was in 2018. So I kind of feel like right now the premium seems to be on raising as much money possible. And I don't see her going on policy, announcing a policy that might shift on Gaza.
Well, look, I mean, the thing is, and I don't know to what extent the Harris campaign is looking at this and how they're looking at it, but since she became a presidential candidate, she's raised something like $200 million or maybe more at this point. And 2/3 of that is from first-time donors. In other words, from small donors. And I think there is a great deal of kind of relief in the Democratic Party. We don't have this choice between someone who seems like he's in decline and might not make it through the next 4 years and Donald Trump. So because of that relief, I think there's been this flood of support to Kamala Harris, and it's shown up financially. But all of that grassroots support means you don't have to listen to one big donor, right? I mean, you don't have to chase the big money if you can make that work sustainably. And the way to make that work sustainably, you might have to come out of your shell and say a position or two, something you believe. I don't know what the Harris campaign is thinking about that, but they're certainly they've been successful in this honeymoon period of making a grassroots donor strategy work. I think the key to making it work over the long term is to remain popular, and the way to remain popular can't be to try to fudge every single issue.
Right. And I want to read another one of your tweets because I think this is kind of reflective on her, silly putty political strategy. As far as I recall,
tragedy, one or the other.
As far as I recall, Harris had already repudiated all this stuff at one point or another during her shambolic "let's try on this policy today" 2020 campaign. What does she actually believe is what we continue to try to find out. So that's from a New York Times, or referring to a New York Times story, which pointed out, in addition to changing her position on fracking, campaign officials said she now backed the Biden administration's budget request for increased funding for border enforcement, no longer supported a single-payer health insurance program, and echoed Mr. Biden's call for banning assault weapons, but not a requirement to sell them to the federal government. Maybe I'm making this less complicated than it is, or more complicated than it is, but according to all the polls I saw, inflation and the economy is the number one issue. Yes,
right.
Democrats are, I believe, being manipulated into going to the right, on the border. I don't think among independents it's the top issue, but I don't actually, on inflation and the economy. I mean, Biden ran on a $15 minimum wage. He forgot the phrase like right away and bowed to the parliamentarian. I have not seen her directly say, if we get in there with a Democratic House and Senate, we're going to propose. I think 15 is a little outdated at this point. we're going to
Right.
propose X minimum wage and forget the parliamentarian. I haven't seen her even adopt the public option messaging. I haven't seen her. I mean, Biden infamously has written stern letters to fossil fuel executives and, grocers, asking them to bring down prices when, correct me if I'm wrong, the government has some tools at their disposal to do more than letters. So I don't see any actual economic policies when that's the number one issue, according to the polls.
Well, I think that brings us actually to the Lina Khan story, which we can then
Sure.
talk about. I mean, what
And
the
just
administration.
tell people, because unfortunately,
Yeah, absolutely.
FTC is not exactly sexy in the media.
Right.
So Lina Khan, head of the Federal Trade Commission, why has she
Right.
become such a lightning rod to the billionaire donors and many of the
Right.
kind of new Democrats?
So she's the head of the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission has authority over consumer protection, and it also has some authority over competition policy, making sure we don't have these giant monopolies that rule America and are able to price gouge and things like that. So, what has Lina Khan done in office? She has enforced a number of challenges to mergers, many of which have been successful, blocking companies from merging, blocking concentration from pooling even more in our economy. She has made sure that there were a lot of drug companies that were filing fake patents to try to keep going with patent exclusivity, particularly on inhalers and things that help with asthma. She not only stopped the filing of those patents, but she got commitments from those drug companies to lower their prices to $35 a month. She has produced a rule that's going to go into effect just in a month or so that would ban so-called non-compete agreements, which are these agreements that I think 1 in 5 Americans have at their workplace that ban them from going to a competitor within a period of time, 2 years, 3 years. It tends to lock people in their jobs and suppress wages because they can't go to a competitor that might offer them more money. So Lina Khan's done a lot of things and made a lot of people very, very upset. And those are just 3 things. There are like a dozen or 2 or 3 that we could talk about. But she's clearly
also
made
investigating Microsoft, correct?
investigating Microsoft, investigating pretty much investigating all the billionaires who are actually calling for her to leave.
Right.
So so we had Reid Hoffman, who's a rich co-founder of LinkedIn. LinkedIn was bought by Microsoft. He now sits on Microsoft's board. He is a centrist Democrat. He runs a super PAC called Mainstream Democrats that fights progressives all over the country.
And I can tell you, he poured in a shit ton of money to Nina Turner's second congressional race.
100%.
Him and the Democrats for Israel.
Right.
And obviously,
they're
she
kind
lost
of
significantly.
alongside them. Like there's the crypto money, there's the pro-Israel money, and there's also this mainstream Democrat centrist money. He's given $7 billion to, I think it was initially at that time, a Biden super PAC that now has become a Harris super PAC. But he's also apparently going on a road tour with Harris in Silicon Valley to raise more money. And he went on CNN and said, yeah, they should fire Lina Khan. She is waging war on American business. And she was
right after she gave the money, by the way, right after he gave Harris the money.
Wasn't exactly after. It was there was a guy named Reed Hastings. There are 2 Reeds, and it gets confusing.
Okay.
There's a guy named Reed Hastings from Netflix who gave $7 million, and the day after, Reid Hoffman said that this money should be, or that Lina Khan should be ousted. But Reid Hoffman actually convinced Reed Hastings to give that money. Yeah. So he's more than a donor; he's a bundler. He gets other people to give. And he wasn't the only one. So Barry Diller, who's the head of a company called IAC, is like a media mogul. He went on CNBC and said, yeah, Lina Khan is a dope and she should be taken out. There was a guy from Starwood, which is a real estate company, who said, yeah, she's been a nuisance to us and she should go. All of these people have the same thing in common. Lina Khan is investigating the companies that they either own or sit on the board of. And so it's very transactional. It's like going to the chief of police and saying, "Hey, your cop is harassing me. Get him to stop. And by the way, here's $7 million. Please get him to stop." So the explicit nature of this, I actually think puts Harris in a bit of a difficult position. Usually these conversations happen behind closed doors, right? I mean, usually, somebody gets taken out and we learn 6 months later that they were told by a donor or something like that. This is very explicit. Everybody knows what's going on. So if Harris turns around and says, "Hey, I fired Lina Khan," everybody's going to know why. Everybody's going to know the reason, right? It's very upfront. And what's also interesting is that when Harris is looking to tout her record, she talks about things Lina Khan has done or that Lina Khan's allies have done. She talked about how the Biden administration has gotten rid of medical debt on credit reports. That's something that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau did. And Rohit Chopra, who's the head of that, is a close ally of Lina Khan's. Lina Khan worked for him at the FTC when he was there. In a more recent speech, Harris talked about we're going to go after price gouging. We're going to go after junk fees. These are all things that Lina Khan is working on. She's working on a rulemaking right now to ban junk fees. So the fact is that you kind of need some people who are unafraid to go up against corporate interests to make your government look good, to actually have your government do something. And all roads lead back to Lina Khan and her allies when you're talking about that. So to the idea that you would get rid of them, you would just rob your own ability to tout a record. Number one, and number two, you'd look like you're kowtowing to oligarchs. So I think, and by the way, since then, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, a bunch of unions, the UAW, the AFL-CIO. I talked to a guy from the Carpenters Union today. They're very strongly for Lina Khan. All of these interests have come out in support, very strong support of Lina Khan. And so now it's like, it's not just, one particular regulator that you would have to take out. You're going up against an entire large faction of the party if you would do that.
Right.